Call to order this meeting of the James City Service Authority Board of Directors for a regular meeting. Mr. Powell, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Hippel.
Here.
Ms. Larson.
Here.
Mr. McGlinnan. Here. Mr. Eisenhower.
Here.
Ms. Sadler.
Here. Next on our agenda is presentations. Cranston's Mill Pond. Mr. Powell, would you please make some introductions for us?
Sure, I'd be glad to. Actually, we just planning to introduce Jeff Corbin. Jeff Corbin is the Vice President for Restoration Systems, which is the company that is the majority owner of Cranston's Mill Pond. I think you're familiar with the background on this project. So I will just turn it over to Mr. Corbin. They requested to make a presentation to the board, and I think he's got about a 10 or 15-minute presentation to make.
I will certainly be brief. How do I click on this? Do I? Yeah, just clicking? Okay. So, well, thank you, Madam Chair and board members. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I think I've had everybody at least out to the pond to look at it and see what it looks like. Hopefully I haven't missed anybody. I got to give kudos to Doug. Doug and his team have been absolutely phenomenal to work with over the last 3 years. Very professional, extremely qualified, and we've had a very open, transparent discussion, and I hope Doug feels that we reciprocated. So thank you to Doug, and kudos to the board for retaining such qualified staff. So let me just start with some background here, so we're all starting from a level playing field. Well, why are we doing this? You all know this probably as well as I do. The groundwater supply, at least in the eastern portion of the state, is being severely depleted. The county's permit, and you definitely know this better than I do, the county's permit was cut 57%, your groundwater withdrawal permit, from a little over 8 million gallons a day to under 4. Your current demand is about 5, and that puts you in a situation of looking for more water, not just to meet present day, but to meet future demands. If it makes you feel any better, you're not by yourself. There are 14 large users in the eastern part of the state that had their permits cut. They're all looking for water. And the state agencies, quite honestly, have asked people to think creatively and think innovatively. Even some of the regional water supply plans say we need to start looking at additional water, surface water supplies. So quite honestly, we felt several years ago that Cranston's Mill Pond could be part of this solution. We are looking for whoever the end user may be, whether it's the county or somebody else, a long-term, reliable withdrawal in the 5 to 7 million gallons a day range. Our team, I'm with Restoration Systems. Chesapeake Bay Nutrient Land Trust is another partner in the ownership of the pond, and Brent Foltz, I think, is here, who represents that company. So we're the owners. We've got outside investors as well. It's not just the two of us by any means. But what I really want to tell you is, when we started deciding to go after a water withdrawal permit, we put together what I think is kind of the A-team. We've got folks like Arcadis, who Paul Peterson from Arcadis of our team is here. Arcadis, to put it in perspective, is the company that just permitted the Henrico multi-billion gallon reservoir. So that's the kind of work that they take on. We feel very privileged that they want to be part of our little project. But we've got biologists, and we've got engineers, and we've got legal counsel, and we've got modelers. So we went into this with the best team that we felt we could possibly put together. Got to show a slide of where we are. You probably know this very well. The red blob is Cranston's Mill Pond. We're not too far from Little Creek Reservoir, which is owned and operated by the neighboring county. We are the non-tidal boundary. So when you go over our spillway, you're in the brackish tidal portion of Yarmouth Creek. Yarmouth Creek runs for about 5 miles, drains into the Chickahominy, which I personally think is probably one of the most beautiful rivers on the planet. I spend a lot of time on the Chickahominy. And then 5 miles downstream into the James and down into the Chesapeake Bay. So what is it? You've seen it, and I've told you some of this before, but just a little bit of history. As the name would imply, it's been a mill pond for various uses for several centuries, dating at least back to the mid-1880s. It shows up in references in Civil War records. Fast forwarding, the dam failed in 2006. Hurricane Ernesto took it out. It took out other dams in the area. I think in this region we got something like 12 inches of rain during that storm. So the old, outdated, and not well-maintained and undersized dams blew out. And I'll show you a picture of that in a minute. We purchased it in 2009, rebuilt the dam, and in 2013 we'd improved it so much that we received an award from the state for the most improved dam. And I'm happy to say that the operating and maintenance certification for the dam was recently renewed, and it's good for another 6 years. So in 2011, we were certified as a nutrient offset facility. That was our original pursuit of owning the land and rebuilding the dam. So we capture nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. That helps the Chesapeake Bay, and under Virginia's very progressive trading program, we can sell those credits to developers to offset their impact. So that was the business model going in, and that is what we currently use it for until we started looking at water use. We're a 50-acre impoundment. We also own 1 foot above the water all the way around, as well as about 8 to 9 acres of upland, which I think you all have seen when you're at the property. We capture water from a large watershed, almost 7 square miles, and it's largely around the property. It's largely undeveloped and it's largely protected. And I make that last point because the report that Brown and Caldwell recently put together for the Service Authority, I think they called it a gap analysis of our permit application, brought up the issue of that you may want to think about buying surrounding land or God forbid, condemning private land in order to make sure that the water quality remains clean. And we we take issue with that statement because we think it's an asset of the pond. This is the county's own GIS online website, which is very easy to use, thank you. And there's Cranston's Mill Pond in the middle, running east-west. To the north, it's already protected with a PDR, Purchase of Development Rights easement. To the south, it's protected with a conservation easement, and the yellow is ag forestal districts. The white is up in the Colonial Heritage area, which, as I understand it, is largely built out. All the purple dots are water quality BMP. So it's largely protected now and will remain that way into the future, and that's what we consider that an asset. Pictures are worth a bazillion words in this case. This is the old spillway, small, crumbling. The water to the right of that spillway is where the dam should have been. Hurricane Ernesto took care of that for us, and this was the dam after we rebuilt it. So you can see why we were awarded the most improved dam in the state. It's now a 100-foot spillway, 100-foot concrete spillway. The walkway is handicap accessible, and the dam is overbuilt, to say the least. Overhead shots, this is just the western portion of it near the end where the dam and spillway, and looking upstream just to give you an idea of surrounding land use and how undeveloped and protected it is. And it's a beautiful spot. So some of the unique features we feel, the water's fresh and the water is clean. We had this validated. We had Cornwell Engineering from Newport News, who I think may have done some work for the county in the past, actually come and take samples and run treatability tests. We wanted to make sure that this wasn't going to require reverse osmosis or membrane filtration. It has no salt in it. It's fresh water, which I'll talk about in a minute, can equate to fairly significant O&M savings in the future. As I said, a large drainage area. We got a 50-acre pond with 7 square miles of runoff coming into it, and I'll show you in a minute what that means when you get a rain event. We are located at the tidal, non-tidal boundary. We are the last stop before the water goes over the spillway and goes into tidal water and brackish water, and at that point becomes harder to treat and more difficult, more expensive to treat. Not only do we receive water from the surface area, we tap into, if you think about the geography in the area, a lot of the land coming in, when you come down Cranston Mill Pond Road, you're up high and you get low pretty quick. Some of the surrounding area is at more than 100-foot elevation. Little Creek Reservoir is at 60. We're at 8. So we're kind of sitting in this gorge, and we actually cut into 2 different groundwater aquifers. Greeley and Hanson has documented this for us. So at base flow conditions, not during a big rainstorm, but during base flow conditions, about 60 to 70% of the water coming in is from groundwater. And we felt that was important to document, and it makes it more of a somewhat stable and reliable water source. The average water availability coming over the spillway is a little more than 8. It's about 8.4 now, million gallons a day. The interesting thing about this is when we started this process, we only had 1 year of data, and the average for that year was a little over 8. We've now got 4 years of data, and the average is a little over 8. So I'm going to take a wild guess here and say the average is somewhere a little over 8, because that's what it seems to be. We have high flows. I'm going to show you a chart in a minute of in excess of 20 million gallons, and if you do the math, in the last 12 months, we've had greater than 4 billion gallons of fresh water come over the spillway. I do want to make a note here. This is not, we are not extrapolating these flows from a nearby river gauge. We're not computer modeling them based on surface runoff. This is our own data based on 2 different sensors that we have installed at the gauge. They're USGS approved for water supplies, and DEQ themselves, the state admits that that's the most accurate data you can collect. So we're very, very confident of these numbers. I've shown you all this before. I should probably apologize to Doug. He's probably got a separate room where he stores all the copies of this I've given him over the last several years. But this is my gut check permit conditions aside, how much water do we have coming over the spillway? And this is now about 4 years worth of data. Each one of these bars is the average flow for a week. And I did that just so the chart doesn't get too crowded, but millions of gallons a day going up and the date going across the bottom. And that blue faded area is just to kind of visually orientate you with where the 4 to 6.5 MGD is. That's where most of the flows are or higher. There are a couple places where it drops low. The first one to the left there, I think, is an anomaly because when we get real high flows, you get a lot of debris at the spillway and the sensor doesn't read well. But the other two areas, those are low flows. And to put that in perspective, we didn't have rain for about 45 days in order to get down to those flows. But the majority of the time, you're in the blue shaded area or you're above. The white line, we do have a little bit of storage. We don't have a great amount of storage, but we do have a little bit, about 1.5 feet, which equates to 19 million gallons we can tap into. Using that, with Arcadis's help, we've put together a simulation tool. So using what's coming over the spillway plus the storage, that 7 line is about what we're trying to reliably get in end user. And then the high numbers there are just the high spikes you see. I will point out, I don't want to get into a discussion over climate change and whether or not the last year is more indicative of what future years are going to do, but we had a very wet year. And for the past 12 months, the average flow over the spillway has been 11.6 million gallons a day. So when you get rain, you get a lot of water. This is just fun with numbers that science geeks like myself like to do. But this is what the sensor out there will tell us. And it's just to show you how the water level and the flow over the spillway responds when it rains. This is a 1-inch rainfall event from earlier this month. Between May 4th and May 6th, we had about 1 inch, and you can see on the bottom there the water level, and I put the MGD numbers on there. But before it started raining, we had about 9 million gallons a day coming over. We got a 1/2 inch of rain. The flow went up to 16. We got another 1/2 inch. It went up to 29. And then it slowly starts to come down over time as the water bleeds out of the surface, the drainage shed. Of course, we only get to use what the state says we can use. It takes a permit. State surface waters and groundwaters are resources of the state, so we have to go through a permit process. That has been a 3+ year journey for us. The journey continues. We're not quite there yet, but I'm going to tell you in a minute where I think we are. It's somewhat of a unique permit. To give DEQ a little deference on the time scale here, we did not go in saying it's going to be James City County. That was not our authority to do. We think it could be useful to the county, but we also think it could be useful to New Kent or Newport News or West Rock or a number of other users. So DEQ has never done this. They've never sat down and said, here's how much water you can have, go find an end user. It's usually the other way around. Usually an end user comes in and says, here's the river we want to go to, tell us how much we can use. It will be a transferable permit. Whoever the end user is, we're trying to do as much of the legwork and spend as much of the prep money as we can so that the end user doesn't have to redo it. There will be some modifications that you'll have to make to it. And then I think the intake location is unique because the intake would be above the dam. It would be in the freshwater part of the pond. And we've already had discussions with VMRC. As long as you stay out of the historical channel bed where before the pond was there, you probably don't even need a VMRC permit. So I think it will be somewhat more expedient to get your permits for your intake when it comes time to construct, or whoever the end user ends up being. So we don't have a permit yet, but we are extremely close, and we've been going back and forth with DEQ. There's going to be a daily max withdrawal, monthly max, annual max, just like you've seen in your Chickahominy permit. The minimum release is where they're hung up. They have a really hard time trying to figure out how much we get to use versus how much we have to continue to release downstream until they know who the end user is. And that's where we keep going around and around and around with them. Some of the end user requirements are going to be typical of permits. You'll have to monitor inflow and outflow. You'll have to report those. You're going to have to consult with wildlife agencies. A lot of this we've already done, but you'll have to do it when it comes time to start constructing your intake. But again, I can't overemphasize enough where they're hung up is we know how much water you have. We kind of know what the environmental impacts are, which are small. It's really hard for them to finalize this without knowing who an end user is. Some of the benefits we believe, this is my last slide, so I'll close out, but we feel this can be a local solution to a local problem. You're not having to go to a faraway river. It's right here in your locality. You can own the asset. You can, for lack of a better word, control your own water destiny. We think in conjunction, and I want to make clear, I would never advocate that you get rid of your groundwater wells. That is the cheapest. You've got the infrastructure in there. keep using them, even though your permit's been cut. But in conjunction with a surface water source, we feel that we can get you into those future demands of 10, 12, 14 MGD. The pond's already constructed, the dam is constructed, it's a state-of-the-art dam. We will be able to transfer the permit to you. I'll tell you, I'm a marine scientist, oceanographer by background. I spent 22 years working on Chesapeake Bay restoration stuff. The first thing I did before I started on this path is to make sure there weren't going to be environmental impacts. I never would have chased a permit that was going to harm Yarmouth Creek or the Chickahominy, and we feel with Arcadis's help and others that we have documented that to DEQ. And a lot of that is because it is tidal downstream. So even though we have 8 million gallons of water coming over a day, there are hundreds of millions of gallons coming in twice a day on the tidal cycle. So we're about 3% of the total, what the scientists would call the tidal prism, which means our impacts are low. And it would allow the county to diversify. You'd have 2 separate sources of water. And as I mentioned earlier, we feel it's a real benefit to the pond that it's already under conservation easement, and so is much of the surrounding land. Hopefully I came close to my 10 minutes.
It's okay.
I'm sorry if I talked. Normally I don't talk that fast, but when I got 10 minutes, I gotta move.
It's all good. It's good information. Anybody have any questions?
Jeff, the water coming into the pond, you were using it originally as a catch sediment, or not sediment, but
Nutrients and sediment.
And what does that do as far as, explain that to us as far as the drinking water and what that does?
Yeah, it's not, nutrients and sediments are not a pollutant in the toxic kind of thing that you would, these are just it's the biggest problem facing the Chesapeake. Too many nutrients in the bay, algae blooms, oxygen drops, fish die, and you got a bad situation. So all the rivers have their own budget for how many nutrients they need to remove. So we're not doing anything different than what a natural pond or what any reservoir would do. We're trapping some of that. It doesn't affect the water quality. Come out fishing with me. I'll show you the kind of fish we're growing. And I mean that. Anybody that wants to come, please come. So it's not a pollutant in that sort of a sense. It's simply that we're keeping it from getting into the tidal waters. The accumulation is very small in the pond. I mean, we've calculated that in the next 100 years, Brent knows the numbers better than me. I mean, maybe half an inch to an inch of sediment in that pond. So it's not like there are tons of dirt coming into the pond, but we are capturing nutrients and we do get credit for it.
Okay, I know that's one of the questions that will probably be asked to us after the presentation. Somebody will probably bring that
Sure.
up, and just want to make sure the board had the information, so.
That was one of the first things we did, is to make sure with DEQ that, even though this was certified as a nutrient bank, really all that means is we rebuilt the dam and we need to keep the pool full. Is there anything keeping us from using this as a water supply? No.
I know with, over at, just went blank on me, Little Creek Dam. Over at Little Creek Dam, they can use that for recreational, activities, fishing and that sort of thing. Would we have the same ability in this pond, since it's a little smaller? Would we have that same ability if we've got the land that's next to it and we do something with that? Would we be able to utilize that as a recreational pond as well?
It's a great question. Yeah, you could. We do have a declaration of covenants on the pond. We were required to put it under easement in order, whenever you do a nutrient bank like this, it needs to be permanently preserved. The covenant is between us and you all, the county. So if the county became the owner, it'd be maybe a little weird that you're both the sign, you're the grantor and the grantee, but the covenant itself allows us to fish and hunt and camp, and we can put a boat shed and we can put picnic sheds. So it's not, we can even cut down some trees for maintenance and all those things. So it's very clear that recreational and sightseeing and bird watching and fishing and camping, all those things are allowed under the current covenant.
Okay, that's one thing I was wondering, not saying we're buying it, just saying that
Right.
if we went down a road like that, and the land that we've got under conservation easement, it used to be a Boy Scout camp. One day it might turn back into something like that, or you never know. But would that pond be able to be utilized for those type of activities?
Right, and then again, of course, the covenant could be amended if, because you are the signatories to it. But, I will be clear, it's not going to allow you to take those 8 acres and build a strip mall.
Right.
But, can you build enough facilities there to hold, boats to go canoeing and kayaking? Can you have a shelter there to have picnics with scouts? Yeah, you can certainly do that.
Now, how much, and you may not be able to answer this, in the other areas that are still possibly able to develop, how much pressure from development will cause this pond to end up in trouble state instead of a
Well,
nice, clean water source?
assuming that they comply with federal, state, and local ordinances and laws and regulations and put in their BMPs like Colonial Heritage has, that's all designed to make sure that nutrients and sediments don't leave their site. So if somebody were to do something illegally, then certainly there might be some impacts. But, the Colonial Heritage already has Deer Lake there, and they already have the purple dots I showed were constructed BMP, drop-down filter BMPs. All that's in place to make sure that any development that occurs does not impact water quality downstream.
Okay, so as long as
I can't envision a situation where something would impact it.
okay, good. That's all I was checking on. Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone? So I just wanted to review, you were talking about the land around the pond being protected. Is all of it? Is there any land in question that's not, or, and I'm just thinking of it in terms of use as a potential water source. Is there any land at all that you know of that?
I don't,
that would be
the
an
other
issue?
benefit to the pond is there's only 6 surrounding landowners that touch us. So even if you were to, in the future, if you're going to contemplate raising this spillway height and dam and turn it into a bigger reservoir, you're still only impacting 6 landowners that you'd have to enter into negotiations with. So I believe the map I showed, all 6 that touch the property are, with the exception of Colonial Heritage that is a development, the other properties that touch us are either under some sort of easement or in an AFF, what do you call them, AFDs? So they're, zoned for that type of use and low use.
Okay, and just to review, I just want to make sure I'm understanding you, how this can be an additional source to any other options that may be out there.
So, and I think Brown and Caldwell looked at this quite a bit. Our pitch all along, if this was to work for the county, would be it's not a standalone source. As I showed, there's going to be times if we get 60 days without rain that you're not going to have 6 or 8 MGD. You're going to have to supplement it with your groundwater. So the approach would be to use this as a primary source, and on days that you need 6 MGD, if there's 6 MGD available, you use it, and you kind of keep your groundwater trickling along. And when there's days when the demand increases and ours drop, then you would get into a conjunctive use where you would tap from both of those sources. Whether or not you're mixing those or using the sources to feed different parts of the county, I don't know. But this has been a conjunctive use consideration since the start.
I got one more. I know, Jeff, when I was out there, you had mentioned that you have an extra foot you can add to the dam. Did I understand that when we were talking?
So it's at, the dam is at elevation 8.1. The old spillway was at 9.1. So when we went back, and it took years, and I say we loosely, I wasn't with the company at the time, but when Brent and his company went through permitting that dam, they wanted it back to 9.1. Even though we weren't thinking water supply, we just wanted more water and more depth. It literally came down to a discussion with the Army Corps of, had we created wetlands and, things had changed in a couple of years, we would have gotten our 9.1 back. And I kid you not, it came down to a point where the guys with the cement truck were coming to pour the footings for the dam, and we just couldn't enter into discussions any longer with the Corps. So that dam should be built to 9.1, and I'm fairly confident that we could get it back to 9.1 with approval from the Corps. Now, anything above that, you're getting more into, constructing a reservoir and having impacts and getting permits. And, reservoirs get built these days. There's one in Henrico County that just got built. So this is not 20 years ago. I think there's a very different political appetite for approving reservoirs. But the 1 foot, I think, could relatively easily be gotten back.
Now, with that 1 foot, and of course, as that 1 foot goes back through the pond, it spreads out so you get a bigger surface. What does that equal? Do you know what that equals in gallons of?
Every foot you go up, until you start getting much higher and it gets a lot wider, is about another 20 million gallons. And it doesn't, I think I may have, I don't know if I sent the right copy here. Yeah, so because since some of you have asked about this in the past, the blue line is 9 foot, even if you go to 14, it doesn't change the footprint terribly, again, because we're in a valley here, so this isn't flooding out
Right.
into Lake Michigan. Huge inland lake-looking thing. This is still staying within the valley. So the red is the outline of the footprint at 14. So basically what it's doing is it's following those headwater tributaries up, and it's spreading out a little bit. So right now, at 8 feet where we currently are, we have about 19 to 20 million gallons of storage. If you went up a foot, that 20 would go to about 40 million gallons. If you went to 14, you'd have about 180 million gallons. So it gets big real quick. And the only reason we showed 14 here is the footprint is relatively small. You're still only impacting minimal streams and wetlands. If you back off a little bit, you're staying out of the dominion right away. So we tried to look for the biggest you can get it without running into significant natural resource impacts. And we figure they're pretty manageable at this size. So you'd go from about a current 20 million gallon storage to about 180 at the red line.
And if that were to be raised up and containing that volume, right now we get events where we have to close the road down because it floods. What would that do? Would it still do that? Even though we've got more volume, we've got more area, it would still probably flood over the road. It's an issue that on a big major event, we'd still have flooding on the road.
Right. Once the pond is full, no matter how big it is, when it rains, you're going to have water coming over the spillway. I suppose, if you knew a nor'easter was coming or a hurricane was coming, at that point, I suppose you could draw the pond down a little bit so you'd have some storage. But, the flooding, we can't control the culverts going through the road. They're not very well maintained. They're kind of getting crushed. I mean, we go out there from time to time. It's not the safest thing to do, but we go out there from time to time and clear them out. I think they're undersized. I think some of that can be fixed by improving those 3 pipes going under the road.
And we've talked to VDOT about that, so they're looking into that as well.
Yeah.
That issue, because that's constant. I mean, it's getting to be a constant thing now. In fact, we keep signs on each end of the road.
I've seen them. You
permanently
keep them up there, yeah.
And that's beautiful. That's beautiful in the county as well.
Can't stop your flooding, unfortunately, but I think if you worked on those pipes, you could certainly improve it.
Thank you.
Anybody? Yes, sir.
If you were shooting for the 4 to 6.5 million gallons a day intake for us, or whoever your client would be, how would that affect your down? I think you mentioned that there are certain parts of the negotiation where you have to maintain certain downstream flows.
Right.
How much is going over the dam on an ordinary day? I think you had it in here again.
Right, so the average flow, I mean, today it's probably at 10 or 12 with some of the rainstorms we've been having, but if there was 8 coming over the spillway, and I should have mentioned too, besides just coming over the spillway, we have 4 pipes built into it that we can release water and control the flow. So on a day when there's 8 coming over and you were only needing to pump 5, then there'd still be 3 million gallons going over downstream.
Okay.
And again, our original proposal was to basically use all of the water because it's tidal. It's really not changing the salinity or anything downstream much because the tide goes in and the tide goes out.
So if the permit requires you to maintain a certain downstream flow, that would actually have priority, and that's where we would, you have to maintain a certain amount of downstream, and then it might limit what we could draw, where we would then have to go to our groundwater.
Yeah, what we have proposed right now to DEQ is a minimum release every day of 300,000 gallons a day, so 0.3 million gallons. So if there was 8 coming over, you would get 7.7, and 0.3 would have to be released through the pipes. And that's basically just to maintain. Again, we don't feel the downstream really needs any of that, but that's just to maintain some continuous flow. And again, when you get a big storm, you're not going to use 20 million gallons. So all that's going over and flushing out the creek.
All right, thank you all very
Thank
much
you
for
very
being
much.
here. We appreciate your time and information. Thank you. All right, next on our agenda is public comment. Do we have any speaker cards?
No, ma'am.
Nothing at all? All right. Next is the consent calendar minutes adoption. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That carries. Next is public hearings, easement, abandonment, Village Walk at Newtown, Section 9, Parcel 2B, Lot 1, Phase 2. Mr. Powell.
The Service Authority has been asked to abandon a very small segment of easement. It's just 57 square feet. The easement located at 4811 Settlers Market Boulevard. The corner of a proposed building is what would go into this easement, or this part of the easement. JCSA has no use for this part of the easement, and we recommend the board adopt the resolution abandoning that part of the easement.
Are there any questions for anyone before we have a public hearing? So we'll open the public hearing. Any speaker cards for that?
No, ma'am.
Nothing? All right, we'll close the public hearing. I'll look to you all for a discussion or a motion.
Motion for approval?
All right, Mr. Powell.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan. Mr. Eisenhower.
Aye.
Ms. Sadler.
Aye. Next on our agenda, board considerations. Number 1, changes to the regulations governing utility service and resolution of appropriation for fiscal year 2020 budget.
There are actually 2 resolutions before you as part of this action item. One is the resolution of appropriation for the fiscal year 20 budget, the details of which were discussed during a public hearing and a subsequent work session. Included in that resolution are the proposed incremental changes to the fixed charges and service rates. This slide summarizes the proposed fee changes for the FY20 budget. The only other fee increase that is proposed is an increase to the grinder pump maintenance fee from $300 to $325. The other resolution simply changes the regulations to reflect the changes to the fees and charges as discussed. Staff, or I recommend approval of both resolutions.
All right, any discussion? Any questions? No, we're good. So we need a motion to approve the resolution?
I think it would probably be best to do them separately. Is that, yeah. So one motion for each resolution.
Okay, so the first one would be for, let me read it, make sure we got it right here.
I think we should do the appropriation resolution first.
All right, that sounds
Move the
good.
appropriation resolution.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan? Mr. Eisenhower? Ms. Sadler?
Aye. And then we need a motion for, what's the second one?
The resolution to the changes to the
The
regulations.
regulations.
Move the resolution to change the regulations.
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower? Ms. Sadler?
Aye. All right, that's all we have for, we have the number 2, contract award, closed circuit television inspection of gravity sanitary sewer pipes.
James City Service Authority has approximately 210 miles of 8 to 12-inch gravity sanitary sewer pipes located in easements along public or private roads, and we're required to conduct television inspections of those pipes every 15 years. An RFP for this contract was advertised, and 3 firms are recommended for the contract award: WBE Construction, Prism Contractors and Engineers, and Precision Measurements Incorporated. 2 of these firms, Prism and Precision Measurements, already have contracts for our off-easement inspections. Awards to these 2 firms will, for both in-easement and off-road inspections in one task order, will make it easier for us to manage this project moving forward, as we can choose from various contractors, and depending on their workload and availability, be able to move forward on some of these faster.
Any discussion, questions?
So you're asking for us to choose Prism and Precision both?
And WB and
Oh,
E.
choose
It's
them.
all 3.
Okay,
Yes, the
okay.
resolution awards the contract to all 3 companies.
Okay, sorry.
So we need a motion to.
I'll move the resolution awarding contracts to the 3 companies identified by the general director.
Mr. Bell?
Mr. Hippel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower? Ms. Sadler?
Aye. Next on our agenda, board requests and directives. Anyone?
I'd like to follow up a little bit on with Doug, if you can, on some of the things about the Cranston's Mill Pond. What would be helpful for us, I think, would be if you could do a very brief summary of if that were to be a water source for us, what would be entailed in the way of infrastructure that for connecting that to our existing, and then treatment of the water. Because there would be obviously some capital expenditure required on that, and I think it would be really important for us to get an idea of the scope and the magnitude of what would be involved in that. And then, we've already mentioned the potential for flooding, but if it were going to be something where we were going to have that, I think any part of it would have to entail some improvements to the road, because that would be definitely needed. The other thing I would caution about is that the two yellow properties up on the map that are in the AFDs may well be, a lot of resource protection areas and stuff, so that it's not too much, but those can be withdrawn from the AFD, and they can be developed by right. So it's not like that there couldn't be development up there. We would hope that there just wouldn't be intense development up in that watershed. And so that's, and the other question I got for you is, what's the project going on by the rec center there along Long Hill Road? It looks like they're cutting across the back, laying big wide pipes, and they've got looks like a temporary holding facility for materials on the one side in the field by the church.
That's an HRSD project.
Okay.
I don't know all the details, but I think they're replacing a line that goes back behind those fields to one of their facilities, back behind the fields where the rec center is. So
Okay,
it's an HRSD project.
But is it essentially, do we have part of our system shut down while they do that, or is this parallel?
No.
Okay.
No, there shouldn't be any impact to our customers at all.
Okay, I was just curious about
Yeah.
that. So once that's finished, that will all get cleaned up there, I
Yes,
hope.
absolutely. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. And I guess in response to your first question, we can try to put together some information in response to your request related to Cranston Mill Pond. I think we're at the point now where I think as the owner, we're also waiting on the DEQ permit
Right.
to see just what they're going to allow to be withdrawn. Also, what will be important is the seasonality, what can be withdrawn when. I think we've done about as much due diligence as we can at this point until DEQ issues a permit, and then I think we can reevaluate once that information is available.
Thank you.
There's no one else?
I'm sorry, I didn't know if so when you get that from DEQ, then you would probably like to wait to let us know what you would need. Is this going to answer what you need or not? So you want to hold off any decisions on that until you have the DEQ?
I think that would be
Okay.
make the most sense.
Okay.
Is to have that information before we do any further analysis.
Okay. And then when you do, you would go into the whole, this may provide this much for this amount of time, et cetera.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. Wow. Okay.
I do have a few items. Wanted to remind, mostly for the viewing public, but May 1st is the beginning of our outdoor water use restrictions. Between May 1st and September 30th of each year, structures with even street numbers can water on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Structures with odd street numbers, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. No watering is allowed on Monday or between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. I also wanted to give just a brief update on our meter replacement project. As of Friday, we had replaced, or the contractor had replaced 3,313 meters since April 15th. So they're moving along at a pretty good clip.
How many did you say?
3,313. So that's a roughly 20% of the total that still needed to be replaced. And they did that in about a 1-month period. So they're moving along well on that project. I know you all are aware, but I did just want to take this opportunity to recognize and remember our employee, Nancy Yost, who passed away last week. She'd been a member of the JCSA team for over 18 years. And as you all know, her sister Jane is the satellite office administrator. And Nancy will very much be missed. She had an impact on a lot of us who worked so closely with her over the years. And I think you all are also aware of some other arrangements to remember her, but I just wanted to take a moment and recognize her at our meeting tonight.
We all extend our deepest sympathies to her family and to the entire JCSA team.
Madam Chair, before I finish my report and before you all adjourn, believe there is a video that Mr. Stevens wanted to share with you all. It's the, I guess, the commercial for the LPGA. I think it's easier for you all to watch it here than it is in the other room. So before we adjourn, I think the folks in the video room are going to load that video for you all to view here.
Hi, I'm Luke, and each year my family has the best vacation ever. There's history, shopping, and golf. But don't worry, because then I get to ride, feed, score, fish, splash, race, cruise, pet, paddle, and did I mention eat? Only 16 more days until we head back to Virginia.
I guess we will look for a motion to adjourn until 4 p.m. on June 25th, 2019 for a regular meeting.
Mr. Hippel.
Aye.
Ms. Larson.
Aye.
Mr. McGlinnan.
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower. Ms. Sadler.
Aye.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, Mr. Stevens. I'm here today to give you a brief update on the space needs assessment. This assessment covers the current space needs that we have, the current space, the space needs that we actually need, and what we will actually need 20 years into the future. The last space needs assessment was completed in 1999, so it's actually been 20 years to date. It was identified in the strategic management plan under goal number 2 as an operational initiative. It was approved and funded in the FY19 budget. Recently, under the FY20 budget that was adopted, there's been funds identified for the facilities master plan, which will actually take a strategic approach to actually meeting the space needs goals that we have. We reached out under the architectural annual services contracts to partner with Mosley Architects. We chose Mosley Architects because they have extensive knowledge and experience with Virginia localities' space needs assessments. We've completed all the departmental and division county needs to this point, and we've received a lot of positive feedback from their comprehensive approach. With me today is Tony Bell. He's the principal in charge with Mosley Architects, and Adam Bricker. He is the project manager. Adam, I'm going to turn it over to him in a minute. He's going to talk about the goals, the project approach, and what we'll expect to see in the final reports for the space needs assessment. So with that,
May I ask a quick question?
Yes, ma'am.
So the last one, did you go 20 years in the future? The last space needs assessment, did you say this is where we'll be in 20 years?
It was roughly, this looks at 5, 10, and 20 years into the future.
What I'm trying to find out is how well did we...
How accurate were they?
Yeah, are you going to address that?
We will.
Okay, great.
We won't address it today, Ms. Lawson, but we will address it in our final report.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to know, did we get there, or are
Yes,
we
ma'am.
still behind?
Yes,
Okay,
ma'am.
I think I probably know the answer, but maybe I don't. So, thank you.
Okay, well, I'll talk a little bit about how the process works, our approach to it, and talk about where we're at in the process, and talk about the next steps. So, as we already mentioned, we're looking at the 5, 10, and 20-year needs, and it's based on James City County's planning department's projection for the population and the various resources that they reference. The goal is to figure out how much space we need for every position and all the supporting spaces to support those departments. And we look at your existing spaces, how you're using them, your existing facilities, and then apply the different space metrics and our best practices to get a baseline for what you need for each department. And then once we finish the space needs assessment, as Sean said, the next step is to use the needs to develop a plan to meet those needs at those milestones. So far, we've done looked at the past studies and givens and conducted a kickoff meeting, and we sent questionnaires out to every department, received those questionnaires back, interviewed with each department, and working on a draft of the space needs. And we're getting data on benchmarking. Benchmark is looking at other localities that are approximately the size James City anticipates growing to in its 20-year plan. Counties we're referencing are Albemarle and Hanover. And then, with those exhibits for the space needs, we'll review that again with each department to confirm what we've done and prepare a draft report for review by executive leadership and the Board of Supervisors for approval. And then we'll finalize the space needs report. These are the interviews and questionnaires we've already gone through. So we met with each of these departments, we walked their space, got a sense of the space that they have and how they're using it, sort of a qualitative and quantitative look at what they've got. And these are the buildings that correspond with those departments. Visited each of those and walked through each of those departments. This is an example. This is from James City County. This is the Satellite Services DMV. I won't walk through each space and how it works, but this is the overall format of the space needs analysis. This is the core of the report. On the left, it'll talk about the position or the space, and then we've got space codes and a quantity of square footage for each one. And we look at the current need, the 5, 10, and 20-year need, and then we have some additional comments, qualitative things from our meeting with them in the site or from our or from the questionnaires about how they use those spaces. The top part talks about the personnel, and the bottom part talks about shared spaces, conference rooms, toilet rooms, those sorts of things. This is an example from Augusta. This is summarizing the departments. So each of those departments would reference that page would be a single line item on a report of this sort, showing that. And you can see here some of their departments from Augusta met their need already for their current need, and some were already behind. So this will help identify that. This is an example showing what the benchmarking will do, and then this one was for Warren County. We actually used James City County as a reference point when we did benchmarking for them. And it'll compare their departments to your departments, so it's not always a one-to-one, but this is to help give you a sense of how your department's staffing compares with other localities. There might be exceptions to James City County versus someone else, but this gives you a sort of a rough idea and helps to compare where you're at with them. Part of the effort that we've also incorporated into the study is a space standards. This helps to plan out the space need for each position, so you know if the person needs an office or a workstation and how much space they need. This you could follow to a T if you're building a new building. If you're renovating a building, you may not follow it exactly depending on the configuration of the space you'd be renovating, but this helps to identify what people need based on their job. This is an example graphically of showing how if you change those, the way that works, the option A is sort of workstations, offices, and conference rooms. Option C is showing some more contemporary options for shared space and workstations that are grouped together. And then option B is sort of a mixture of those two. It's got more workstations, but different types of spaces. And as part of the master plan, we can look at how that would affect your overall space needs or space needs for different departments. This is building B. This is the existing departments, and then their shared spaces, a graphic showing the space that is allocated to them. Here's another one for building D, showing attorney, county admin, and economic development. What we're trying to achieve, this is an example, this was from Warren County, and this will talk a little bit about what comes next. In the master plan, this was their existing building and where the existing departments were located. And then as part of the master plan, the part on the left was an addition, and then you can see that the departments were sort of spread around and reallocated to fit into the finished building. This is in terms of planning out a site, so a campus. This is Hanover County's, one of their main campuses, showing existing facilities and showing new buildings and planning out how that would be developed over time. So it's not a one-step process. You build over time and you plan those steps ahead, and this is that roadmap to follow. Our next steps, we've added courts and school admin, so we're going to send questionnaires to them and conduct interviews with each of their departments as well. And does anyone have any questions?
I've got a few. In your space analysis of Warren County and James City and Frederick, Fauquier, are those 2006?
So in 2006, we did a space needs analysis for Warren County. They were currently at about 35,000 population, and they anticipated in 20 years they would be about 65. We asked them, who do you, as you look around the Commonwealth, who do you want to grow up to be? And they identified James City County. At the time, your population was about 60,000. So we took that snapshot of you in time and said, this is who Warren County is going to grow up to be. How many planners do they have in the planning department? How many people do they have in the treasurer's office, Commonwealth attorney, things of this nature? And we use that as the benchmark. So now, for James City County, we're saying, who is James City County going to grow up to be? You're anticipating right now your planning department, using Weldon Cooper information as well, be about 117 to 120,000 people 20 years out. We looked around the Commonwealth on who's got a population about that right now, Albemarle and Hanover. And we said, are those good comparators for you? Yes, they're not urban population. It's not Arlington County by any means. They have, in the case of Albemarle, they have a city within the county. So we think it has a lot of good comparisons to you in here in James City. So that's why we've selected them. So we're going to grab their numbers. Matter of fact, we already have. And we're going to say, this is where Hanover and Albemarle are now. So as your departments are anticipating where they're going to grow to, we'll use that as a benchmark. So I'll single out the treasurer again. If they're currently at, say, 15, I'm just grabbing that number out of the air, and they say they're going to grow to 20. If we're looking at Hanover and if Hanover and Albemarle both have 25, we might raise an eyebrow on that 20 and say, are you sure? Because here's two localities who have that population when you anticipate you're going to grow to, and they both have more than that.
Right.
And your treasurer may say, well, you know what, we're going to be more efficient than that. We're using more digitization. We're using more animation so that we're not going to need as many staff as Albemarle and Hanover are today. We put that in the report, and you have good information then to move forward with. Okay. So we're going to do that for every department within the county. Use the Albemarle and Hanover as a second check, because we're all gauging that crystal ball. It's pretty easy to know where we're going to be in 5 years, right? 10 years. When we get 20 years out, it's tough. It's more difficult. But using these counties as a model, we can get a better guess. Same thing with PD, police department. Obviously, when we grow population, we need to grow patrol officers. Yep. We need to grow investigators. So we'll use those localities as a model to help us gauge where we think James City County is going to be.
Now, the vision, of course, the board knows it. The vision I have for James City County, I might as well tell you now. And I'm surprised that at this point we didn't do an interview of some sort with the board and say, what are y'all seeing? What do y'all think as we're doing this needs study? What do y'all see is sitting at this level? What do you see as a county as a whole? Because, each department sees their needs, and then we try to see all the needs. I see a building 5, 6, 7 stories tall. I see it's centrally located in the county, preferably War Hill. That's centrally located, and it's growing. The county's growing that way. It's not growing this way. I see parking garage underneath it to keep our employees safe and also be green and earth friendly. I see that and I saw this as when I was assistant fire chief with the volunteers, and we'd have emergencies, and I'd watch all the vehicles come to the OC, meet, and they meet at 8 o'clock. We've got a hurricane coming in, and we're meeting at 8 o'clock. So we meet at 8 o'clock, and then, it's changed. It's going from a 3 to a 4. They're thinking it's going to hit us. So then we meet again at 3 o'clock. And then by the time everybody drives there, drives and goes and tells all their staff, this is what we're doing. These are the areas we need to concentrate on when this storm's coming. I saw a lot of it. It was needed, but a lot of wasted movements. Where if we're under one building, at first as a citizen, I know I can come there and I can get everything I need in James City County out of this building. Second, I can, as a county administrator, I can sit there and go, okay, I need to see such and such, I need to see this person, I need to see that person. And we're so spread out here, and we needed it because as we grew, we needed a building, and we needed another building, and that's what happens. But you get to a point where we've grown up to a point now where we really, in my mind, need to make a move is have a central located building and have all of our services underneath there, including it could be a place for school board meetings. All of our meetings, all our conferences and everything are going to be on floor 7, say. Everybody in the county knows that if anything's going on, it's on floor 7. If I need to pay my water, if I need to pay my sewer, my taxes, everything's underneath the building. I want to vote, it's underneath that building. And then, of course, there's our outside services, maintenance and all that. And 3 miles down the road from this location is the James City County old landfill that we own. And we could put metal buildings on that and have all of our equipment under roof. And within 3 miles, everybody's connected. Because you'll see some people that will retire, and they may have been in James City County 20 or 30 years. And someone else may not know them because they're across the county. And we'll have to have some satellite services, of course, but centrally locating a building and making it a hub to the community is what I think we need to start. Plus, our maintenance is going to be next to nothing because we're not maintaining all these buildings. I can take the buildings that we have now and put those back in taxes because I can sell those and get private people in there. I can get tax on that. My vehicles are going to be next to nothing because we're not having to drive the building to check things out. Where our employees are all under the ground when we have anything that, they're leaving for the night or whatever, snowing, rain or whatever, put their stuff in the vehicle, they come out, hit a button, the gate opens and out they go. So they're safe and secure as well. So, I know it's going to be a chunk, at first to pay for it. But in the long run, the maintenance and the savings on the vehicles, the savings on all the building maintenance, all the ACs and everything else is going to end up paying for itself in the long run. And we'll be, by taking a bigger bite now, we'll be in a better position for the future. And we got a building that's going to be a 50-year building. A simple, good, solid structure. So, I think that's, in my mind, in my position is, that's where we need to go. And I pushed that just about day one I've gotten on the board and said, we need to really, and with all our staff, 99% of them underneath one building, it's going to be easy to know who's who. If there's an emergency, meet me on floor 7. Boom, everybody's there. And so they'll be able to interact better with themselves. I'll be able to go from code and compliance to water to environmental back to the county administrator with push a button and elevator going up and down. I'm not driving across the community having to try to find this and that and the other, or going from building to building to building. So that's my vision of where we need to go and bite the bullet and start looking at, we're grown up. Let's get in a building that we can be proud of and we can all, be in one. And plus, in the War Hill area, we've got the space, and also that's an economic driver as well in that area down there. So that will help the economy as well down there because everything's going to build around it. You put up a big complex, people are going to build around it. They're going to want to be near it. So that's just my 2 cents, guys.
Well, that's okay. I guess to take a step back, the space needs is whenever we met with each department, when we meet with them, the first thing, and Sean's got it probably memorized by now, we say, imagine we took everything out of you, just threw it all out in the parking lot, got rid of everything you have. Don't think about how you're doing it today. Think about the demands that you serve, that your department has to address, and describe what your facility would look like. What type of space do you need? So it's trying to get people out of thinking about, well, I sit right here, and I turn over here. So the space needs is really thinking about just the concept of what I need. I have this many people. These are their positions. This is the type of space each person needs. These are the support spaces we need. So the study is really about getting information to help us start to look at those directions. And then when we get into the master planning, it starts out with looking at different options so we can decide the right direction to go. What if we put everyone in one building versus what if we tried to work only with the stuff we have, and that'll help to inform the direction we should go.
And the problem with some of that is short-sighted.
Right.
And, it's easier, and I do construction, so it's easier to add 2 more rooms onto this building to fill the needs, and it's cheaper than building a whole complex. But there's going to be a point where we're going to have to actually sit down and go, we are in need of a county complex. And if we don't start it now, it's going to be, if not now, when? Because it's coming. You're going to have to eventually, you can keep band-aiding and spending money, and I know with the houses and fixing houses up, fixing commercial buildings up and all that, it's a lot of revenue. It's a lot of money being spent in that. And that's money that with a new building, you're not going to have those costs that we're having now. Plus, I'm taking all the spread out spots that we have and going, okay, now I can sell these spots off and I can generate revenue where I can't now. So now I've got everybody under a new building and it's safe and secure, and we'll just be so much more efficient. I watch the daily activities and watch how, all of our staff have to do so many things to get their job done. Where if they were going from floor to floor, they could accomplish a whole lot more. And it's not their fault. It's just the way, and it's not anybody's fault. It's just how we grew up,
Right.
and how we, were able to, okay, we'll add another building here. We need a building here. Well, let's go ahead and rent this instead of buying it, because we might put that, and the board's done a great job as far as trying to figure out, do we rent? Do we buy? Do we lease for a little while and then move them into this space? And can we put two different groups together and put them in this space? But I think it's to the point now where we've got to really have a vision for the future, and I think this is the start of that vision.
Yep, that's the goal.
Yep. Okay, thanks, guys. That's just my 2 cents.
I think it was 4 cents.
Two, I was gonna say, so now a couple bucks.
Anybody else?
I'd say I'd like to see the report.
Yeah, so once we have the report, then will the board start, what will the board's role be? And
So the finalization of the report we're working on now, the space needs assessment, is going to be a number. It's going to be a number, probably 6 figures, of the amount of space that James City County needs in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Then the next step is what Supervisor Hippel has just been describing, is developing options for that. And looking big picture, what is the vision? Do we see ourselves continuing to expand at Mounts Bay Road? Or do we see ourselves continuing to expand at Tuning? Or do we see ourselves constructing a new campus out at War Hill? We'll be back to you to talk about those options, because we'll definitely want your input up front. No need to chase paths that we don't collectively think are viable. And like we did up in Hanover, we'll talk about where we construct new buildings, where we expand and renovate buildings, where we repurpose buildings. So if we built a new building to, say, replace the administration building, what would we do with that building? Would we tear it down like we did Building C? Or would we repurpose it for another function? Or would we sell it? We aren't there yet. So the space needs gives you a number. The next step, the facilities master plan, is where we create options. There may be 3, 6 options we look at. From a new 7-story office building that would consolidate all county functions, to a compromise on that, a 4-story building that would consolidate 50% of the functions, and the other 50% remain what we call decentralized for whatever reason. Obviously, fire. You said you were the former assistant chief. Fire, you want that decentralized, where the fires are going to be occurring.
Right.
You don't bring all those functions to one location. So we'll talk about that with you as to what provides the best economic solution, as well as provides the best operational efficiency for the county in the long term. But the goal here, the big picture goal, is to create a plan. That we're no longer in the reactionary mode where somebody calls Sean and says, Sean, I got 2 people starting tomorrow. Where are we going to put them? We all knew those 2 people were coming. We knew it 10 years ago because we knew the treasurer said I was going to add 2 staff in this year, and now we've created a plan for how that's going to happen. Does that answer your question, Ms. Lawson?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you.
And you've got an extra shed on Tuning, don't you? Because that's all you'll have over there, shed. All your buildings are shed.
Okay, that's all right. Other questions? All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a
Look
great
forward to
day.
working with y'all
We will be back
on our new building.
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okay, our next is naming of county facilities and memorials. Let me start out by saying that, we've had several requests in the past from individual board members about some of these things, and we've just sort of had an opportunity to talk with each other and come to consensus on whether we want to do one or not. But it was made pretty clear that we really don't have an overall policy on how we want to deal with that. So I'll turn it over to Jason and Scott to talk a little bit, because what I'm thinking is, we have these resolutions here, but I'm not sure whether we ought to hold on until the board is comfortable that we have a policy that we can all work from that is consistent before we start passing these things. Is that a reasonable approach? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know that I have too much more to say other than we put together two of the resolutions. I talked with Mr. Hippel about the third one that the board had discussed. But I also went ahead and have started to do some research on some other localities to see what kind of naming policies are out there. And I think we have a pretty good list of things to go on. It's, pretty standard things. Generally, I think most localities have their county-owned buildings and facilities named after locations or primary functions rather than people. If they do, name them after a person, it's either because a majority of the funding came from for construction came from that person, or if it is a public individual, a lot of the times they have a clause where that person should be deceased. So that's something else that it has been floated by some other localities. There are probably 7 or 8 things I think that are sort of consistent between the places. But if you'd like to go in a direction like that, I'm happy to put together some of those things that I found elsewhere and let you guys talk about what you think might be appropriate for us. The other side would be how we handle the road naming. I think the policy could probably be pretty similar, but we want to make sure that we're clear whether or not we're talking about just county facilities and buildings or if we're talking about road dedications and memorials too, because we've had requests for both.
Yeah, we had roads, sections of roads, bridges, and things like that.
And that comes, the CTB, the Commonwealth Transportation Board, is who gives us the authority to do that. Generally speaking, they still have to vote on it, but if we give a recommendation by resolution, they've generally been supportive. I said we did Judge Stone's last year. Some of the other bridges in the area have been named the Jack Massey Bridge on 199. And some other ones. So they've generally been supportive of those when the board makes that request.
Okay.
Is there ever any, or have you come across, do they get down to like talking about naming a specific room as opposed to an entire building?
Yeah, so I did see that in a couple locations. It's usually a little more flexible, internal to the building.
Okay.
Is what localities seem to.
So what you're asking is if we're okay with you putting together this information to bring back to us, and we don't have to accept it as a policy, but we can accept the information.
Absolutely.
So I'm okay with that. Ruth Larson, only speaking for myself.
Well, it might be useful for us to provide some guidance to Jason in terms of what things might be included. I think there are some things that I suggest. One is that personally, I don't like somebody's got to be dead. I think it does make sense to say that somebody should be clearly no longer active in the field in which they're being recognized, in a sense. But I'd also say that if we are talking about facilities, the facility ought to have a relationship. The individual should have a relationship to that facility. That there's a clear rationale for a particular naming opportunity. So,
like Mr. Oyer's bench out there.
Right. So those are a couple of the things that I think would be useful.
So I guess I'm not so bent on the facility part. If it's somebody in the county we're trying to, because we may be trying to honor somebody that may have had nothing to do with this building. I'm just going to pull it out of the air. But is somebody worthy of a recognition? So then what do you what if they've made all their contributions at Busch Gardens? I'm just making stuff up here. Busch Gardens. So, but it's important to a particular board member that they be honored in some way. It'd be the Busch Garden meeting room or whatever.
One of the things I would think is that if you're going to I think we separate these things a little bit because the roads and the bridges are, we sort of have guidance on how that goes, and that's usually fairly straightforward. We've got several bridges, several things.
Well, I would still like that because I've seen nothing.
Yeah,
So
well,
I'd
like to see that come back
spelled
by.
out.
But I think even for those, or for especially as the facilities like in our county, that the naming ought to be. I agree. We don't have to wait for them to pass away. But if they are not actively involved, like for example in local government, if someone who has had a tremendous influence or a tremendous impact on the county, or people who are not in local government, people who are in business or do philanthropic work and everything, there are things that we can find where there are people that we think really deserve the recognition for their contributions to our community, and we have the opportunity to honor them by naming something like that after them. I think it's one where we probably need to have, Jason, more of a vetting process, because I think what we ought to do is if a board member or anybody wants to think there's one worthy of doing it, to bring it to the county administrator, and then we could vet the background and pass it around amongst the board and consider it, and maybe consider it a work session or something. I think that's going to be a little bit better process than me going around having conversations one-on-one with everybody, because that precludes you from having a conversation with her about it. So if we have the nomination process where it comes to us and then we go through a discussion of it and then we give the approval to press ahead, then you've got pretty clear guidance.
Yeah, I did see one locality where all of the naming required, if it's a 5-person board, a 4-1 vote.
Yeah.
They did have the requirement for the person to be deceased, but if it was a unanimous vote, that could be a way to get around that, essentially. So it was sort of a tiered approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very tough because you don't want to come out in public, certainly, about, not wanting something voted, but I do think it needs to be somewhat of a public, at least talked about in public. So I guess for me, I'd like to see what staff can come up with. And then I like this type of discussion at a work session. May not get through it immediately. We may have to tweak it a little bit, but I hope we could workshop it.
Okay.
Would that be a closed session?
From talking to Adam, I would think that has to be an open session. I know that's what you're talking about is difficult. I would have to defer to the county attorney whether we could do any of that in closed session, but.
Because if we're talking about an individual and one or two people say, well, I'm not sure I want to do that, then it may embarrass that person and the board members who may say, I'm thinking a little different, and I don't want to embarrass anybody.
I guess we've got our county attorney here.
Would that be something we could do in a closed, the actual motion would be out and open, but would that be something?
A deliberation of whether we want to entertain something.
Would that be a closed session?
Just for our policy on naming?
No, if we were going to
The Michael Hipple 7-story building out at War Hill.
I knew you were on my side.
Could we, could that be discussed?
Admittedly, that's not one I've been asked before. I'm going to say if I've got to do it off the seat of my pants, I'd tell you probably not. It's probably not a closed session item.
Right, so
Even though it's like, go ahead, John.
with this personnel.
That's what I'm thinking, like personnel.
Reports and commission appointments, things like that, but.
Right.
But personnel is an employee of the board.
Right.
So really you have 3 personnel.
If you were naming it Jason.
So there's no question.
That was my next question.
There's no question that if we're talking about the policy, that's an open session.
But the individual.
And then the question about the individual might be one where there is a process spelled out whereby effectively individuals consult with the county administrator on a reaction before it becomes a matter of discussion.
I'll double check, but I suspect it's not a closed session item.
Okay. Right. I wouldn't think it'd be closed session.
Yeah, I think, and I realize that that's part of, but I also like some sort of communication prior to just temperature taking Because
Exactly.
I still may not be comfortable, but to say that when somebody's asking me right before a meeting, do you mind if we name the building after you? I just would rather see a process. So,
I agree.
but maybe see what you can.
Yeah, so I'll put something together and we'll bring it back.
In a way that individual could be vetted rather than us just throwing it on the table.
Sure.
Well, if there's a nomination, I would think that if someone thinks someone's worthy of it and it's a nomination and the county administrator has that, and we go through our process, he can basically, when he does our one-on-ones, he can brief us on it and get our feedback. So he'll get a feeling from where people have potential concerns maybe and know whether everybody says, oh yeah, that's fine, or maybe a couple say, yeah, I'm not so sure. And then when we come to our work session, we know where we are.
And then we have to make that decision, are we, because we're not all, it may not be a 5-0 vote, and it's not personal. It's just for
awkward.
It is awkward, but, maybe we wanted.
This is one of those areas where I think it's very important that we have consensus on the board. It's to name somebody on a 3-2 split vote. It's just not the way we need to be doing business. So I'm just hoping we can have some better guidelines for how we entertain and vet these things, so that we have a more set process. So with that, if you guys will bring some of that back to us as time, and just give me an idea of that later on as to how long you think it'll take.
It won't take very long.
Okay. Because I would like to hold off on these until we, although we do have 2 right now that are on our work session thing, but we'll hold off on those until we get back to them. Okay. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Okay. Now we're going to talk about the Eastern Virginia Regional Industrial Facility Authority.
Yes, sir. Ms. Sadler, I'll take the lead, and if you, anytime you'd like to interject, please feel free. Your RIFA board has met 2 times over the last several months and is still working through some growing pains of this new organization and standing itself up. Ms. Sadler and Robin Bledsoe are your 2 appointees, and Jason is your alternate. We still have an alternate to appoint should we remain a member of the Eastern Virginia RIFA. The last meeting, the board discussed operating costs and some minimal operating costs. Newport News has agreed to be sort of the staffing for meeting agendas, minutes, board notices, those kinds of things. Hampton has agreed to be the fiscal agent, so from a money standpoint, they're going to hold the money and work that way. But there's still audit expense expected. There's still board and liability insurance that's expected. There's still probably an attorney cost that would be expected for the RIFA itself. So to have those kind of operating costs. And as we were leaving that meeting, or the discussion of that, all the localities were asked, could they support financially to the operating costs? So our second meeting, as that discussion went on, I will say Ms. Sadler and Ms. Bledsoe really represented the board's take on it well. And hey, when this was brought to you last fall, we were talking about we wouldn't have any costs to be a member of it unless we wanted to participate in a project. And we weren't talking about a project, we're talking about operating costs. And so they did express concern. We didn't say we wouldn't bring it back. The request was, would we come back to you and ask where you're willing to support? And the agreement does say you have to approve any money. So the agreement we have to be part of it, they can't obligate you to money. You've got to obligate the county to an expenditure. They were breaking it by population, 50,000 and up. They were asking 3,000 an entity per year. 50,000 or less, they were asking 1,500. And again, there was a lot of debate. Well, if you need 3,000, why not ask for 6? Back to the point of, no, we ought to ask for what we need. Do we really know what we need? It's again, I think a frustrating conversation during that board meeting for a lot of us, just because it's just a lot of unknowns and still working through. So I think we were, I guess, concerned with where we might end up and should James City County stay with, if we were having to put money into it. Subsequent to that, there have been ongoing conversations with the CAOs trying to figure out a way, could they not have operating costs, or could they be paid through other funding sources? And I believe, again, there will be an opportunity that at least a year could be paid through outside funding sources. So that was the information I shared or heard yesterday and shared. Ms. Sadler, Ms. Bledsoe, our chairman, I spoke with them and then tried to email the rest of you so you at least have that's an option. And as your county administrator, at no cost, in terms of money, it's still time. So it's still Ms. Sadler and Ms. Bledsoe's time, because the meetings are going to be some more work. My hope is you'd stay in this year, at least during the time that there is no cost to us, and see how it unfolds and the benefit of it long-term for James City County. I think the question, I don't know that I need a vote, Mr. Chairman, but at least consensus that we could take back to say, we're not paying operating costs, at least not at this time. Because that was what we were asked to bring back, correct, Ms. Sanders? Would we be willing to pay? And my sense has been the answer is no, but I just, from the board standpoint, if that's the consensus of the board, that would make it easy for us to deliver that message back.
Is that, you say the operating cost is at $3,000 a year?
Yeah,
but that's just an estimate then.
$3,000 a year, again, I think it's a good starting number. But at least part of the conversation is over time, if you had many projects going, would the RIFA need staff? And so that was conversation that if it's $3,000 this year, could it be more in year 5 or year 10? And the answer is probably. But I do think for $3,000 today, if that's all I ever thought it was going to be, I'd probably say we ought to consider it. But I do get concerned that it goes from $3,000 to $5,000 to $10,000.
I think it's the uncertainty, because going in, we didn't think that there would be anything until there was a project. Then all of a sudden, when we arrived, there was this huge, it was quite interesting discussion on who's going to pay how much. And we were a little taken aback that was out there at that point. So we kind of took a step back and talked about it, figured out how best to proceed. And then the news that Scott had yesterday with, all right, for a year, we'll hold off on that. And then, but that said, it was just a little, concerning. I just want to make sure that the organizational part is done and that we're being asked what we're being asked, and then we can depend on that, and that it's, fair all the way around.
The other thing to add is, I think Southside localities are interested in joining the RIFA as well. There is some value if you have a project that joint localities would like to work on, rather than a RIFA being the Southside being separate from ours. I think there is some interest, and the board had discussed a willingness to allow them to join. That would provide money, that same startup money. That decision was made that any money any member had paid to join, if somebody came in, they'd have to pay that amount. So we paid some initial money to start it. So they would have to do that plus any cost going forward. That would help this. The budget of operating costs is somewhere around $16,000 is the estimated budget. Well, if you have more members, that doesn't necessarily go up, but that operating cost gets lower and lower. So that's something we would know better in a 12-month time frame. And you still would have an opportunity then to say, it just doesn't make sense for us, or it does at that point.
Well, I'm comfortable staying in it as long as we abide by our initial that we didn't want to fund the ongoing operation like that, I guess, until we see how the organization is going to shake out. Because right now it's sort of like, well, we don't know what the organization is going to be, but we could use some money.
Yeah.
And I'm not comfortable with that. I guess I'll look to the board. Anybody has, if everybody is in agreement with Mr. Stevens' approach to going back to them and telling them how we feel about it. If we can do that by consensus, that'd be fine. I don't think we need to take a vote necessarily, do you?
And I think regional stuff works real well, but I have a worry with, do we have a budget, an actual budget? Do we have bylaws? Do we have everything in place for this organization? I think in our work session, I even asked them about, executive director and another large organization that we're going to pay in to keep the organization going and not getting anything out of it. Right. I don't know if they've reached over to the TPO or PDC to see if there's anything that can help there and maybe utilize that building down there as a headquarters, and with the staff we have down there that we pay already regionally. Would we have, is there something we can pay into that to have a dedicated staff member that would handle some of this stuff that they see may come up? And I don't think they've looked into those options. I think we're getting a horse.
They would need to travel this just for meetings. They would need to travel from over there to over here for meetings.
Wherever y'all set it up, that's y'all's.
Just saying.
And Mr. Hill, I think the short answer, they've looked at a lot of options. I think as more of the south side, if localities there join it, makes it maybe easier for the PDC or Heretta maybe to be an agency that would take some of that staffing effort if the need becomes. I think someday somebody's got to help more than what Newport News wants to do. But I don't think that's next year. I think that comes in years future, and we'll have some time to decide, does that make sense for James City County or not?
And is the first project that's up, is that the one in York County?
The project that's pushed it is the Unmanned Systems Project.
Right.
It's a little different in that your normal RIFA project would be, we all put a certain amount of money in jointly, and then we all get money out, right? We sell it, or a company moves in, employs people, pays taxes. That tax money then is divided back to the localities that paid in. The Unmanned Systems Project is not anticipated to have a return. It's meant to be a beneficial one. So we'll have more discussions on that. I think a lot of localities will wonder, should we be part of that? But that is what drove the formation, because there was a project out there. There is some regional interest. I can't tell you which localities will want to be part of that for sure. The cost isn't great to be in it, but it's not the typical project of you put money in and then there's a guaranteed buyer and rate of return. I mean, that's the unknown with it. It's meant to be a testing facility so that you would attract business to the region, and then there'd be a facility for drones testing that would make us a better location for those type of businesses.
And I can see that. The only thing I'm worried about is this group I thought was set up to be more of a, we've got a project, y'all put X amount into it, and then we're going to share the profits of everyone, and not a,
It's supposed to be.
right, and so.
Yeah, and you didn't have to participate.
Right, you could get out, or you could go to another jurisdiction, and I think you can jump from one RIFA to another. If you see something that's outside where your area is, you can go into another RIFA and join them and be part of maybe something up further up Northern Virginia that they're doing that we maybe feel that's going to benefit us a little bit better. But
yeah, I don't know that with certainty. That wouldn't surprise me that you can join in where it makes sense. And I think the operating cost discussion is one, and then you get into a project, and that's a future conversation.
Right.
And you can decide project by project, do you want to participate? And then you make your assumptions on what your cost and return are going to be, and you make a decision based on that. So the Unmanned Systems Project is a future discussion, but it's one that we'll have to at some point be asked, do we want to be part of? And we'll have to make a decision on that when that day comes. The RIFA here could have 4 or 5 or 10 projects. I don't think the number of projects is limited, but we would have an opportunity to be part of each one or not.
And I think maybe they've just got to get a little more organized and tell us the direction and where their focus is, and give us dashboards on what they're going to hit and where they're going to be. I think that's our biggest concern is we don't know what we're totally getting into.
That's right.
We knew when we started, but now it's changed a little. So it's just a few questions. It might be able to answer fairly quickly, but I think that's what the board's concerned with.
Okay. Are you comfortable with the consensus of the board on communicating that message?
Our message back will be the board was concerned with paying operating costs, not willing to do that at this point, but certainly willing to be part of it until such time as we have a monetary discussion in the future.
Okay. All right. Okay, we are down to our last item on the board discussions, and that's Jolly Pond Dam. Jolly Pond Dam.
Good afternoon, members of the board. Chairman.
Yeah, we might give her some.
Ms. Larson.
Sorry. Good afternoon, members of the board, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Stevens. The purpose of this presentation is to provide the board with current information regarding Jolly Pond Road. More specifically, that portion of Jolly Pond Road that crosses the Jolly Pond Dam. The road and dam have experienced some degradation over the past year that has raised concerns for the safety of the traveling public. This briefing will provide some historical information as well as a timeline of events over approximately the last dozen years, and more specifically, events that have taken place in the last year. Jolly Pond is privately owned, covers an area of approximately 53 acres with a watershed of approximately 7.8 square miles. It's situated on Gordon Creek, which serves as a tributary to the Chickahominy River. It is an earthen dam built in approximately 1790. It has been around for a long time. Jolly Pond Dam is registered as an impounding structure with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, DCR. The permit is currently expired. The dam's owner is Mr. William C. Kane Jr. and Angelia Kane. Mr. Kane is in attendance tonight. The dam's embankment is approximately 675 feet long. The width is approximately 22 feet with 16 feet of asphalt roadway going across the embankment. Has two spillways with a bridge over each spillway, primary and an emergency. It is classified as a small dam with a maximum capacity of 413 acre feet and is classified as a low hazard dam. On January 31st, 2009, just over 10 years ago, VDOT closes the road over Jolly Pond Dam due to safety concerns and the expiration of the dam's permit with DCR. Approximately 2.5 years later, on October 25th, the James City County Board of Supervisors passed a resolution requesting the Commonwealth Transportation Board to discontinue a portion of Jolly Pond Road in the state secondary road system, thereby allowing James City County to assume control of that portion of the road. Approximately 6 months after that, on March 14, 2012, the CTB granted that request and removed Jolly Pond Road from the VDOT secondary inventory. In all, the road was closed for a little over 3 years. James City County recommended and placed an 8-ton weight limit restriction with signage limiting the traffic across the bridge or the dam. We also initiated a maintenance and inspection program where we inspected the bridges on a biannual inspection basis and also provided maintenance. During the years of fiscal year 2014 up until the present, the county has spent approximately $98,000 on inspections and various maintenance items, armoring the shoulders of the roadway, some asphalt work, maintenance on the bridges, etc. In July of last year, 2018, site investigation revealed a subsurface void that had formed undermining the roadway at one of the concrete embankments on the concrete bridge. This is a void that was actually underneath the roadway. We placed temporary measures to mitigate further degradation of the embankment, which is that poly and some sandbags there. And we also placed a lane closure to direct traffic away from the affected area. Since this is on private property, James City County required permission from the owner to enter the property and conduct an inspection of the site. We obtained a temporary lease agreement from Mr. Kane and conducted exploratory work to evaluate the dam and recommend a repair. James City County hired ECS to conduct a site evaluation with support from Branscombe. We received a report from ECS with a recommendation for a temporary repair of the washout. Upon looking into actually conducting the repair, we discovered from DCR that the county will require an alteration permit to do any work to the dam. In order for us to get a alteration permit, it's required that the owner of the dam have what's called a maintenance and operations permit through DCR. County staff met with Mr. King and his wife and DCR representatives on September 19th of last year and discussed this whole situation. The county has, basically, we've been in a holding pattern. We really can't do anything until DCR issues an operations and maintenance permit for the dam. And as 8 months have passed, we believe that it is a known hazard to the traveling public, and we're concerned about just letting time pass without something happening. The options we see currently, after discussion with the county attorney and the county administrator, we narrowed them down to these two options, where one being that we upgrade the dam to meet the state safety standards. We'd need to commission a complete assessment of the dam and the road to establish a proposal for the scope of work that would be required, and also an estimate for the construction cost. These efforts would have to be coordinated with VDOT and DCR to ensure that our upgrade efforts conform to their requirements and expectations. Option 2 there, abandon that section of the road, is the road would become private, revert to private property, and that the owner would be able to limit access as they see fit. Are there any questions?
My first question, any answers? My first question for you is, we've been in sort of a holding pattern for about 8 or 9 months with DCR, but you had if I understood the presentation correctly, you, in order to go in and do any repairs on it, you have to have a maintenance agreement with DCR.
James City County would require, anybody would require what's called an alteration permit from DCR, which we present the plans to DCR. They review them, see if they are adequate and meet their standards, and then they either approve it or say, no, we need to come back in.
So we presented that to them?
No, we have not.
Okay. Do we, it comes down to the issue of, do we know whether or not it is, quote, repairable to meet their standards, or is it an issue of cost? Because it sounds like we're just playing the bureaucratic standoff right now with them. Because my first question is it repairable so that we can make it safe to transit? If it is, what's entailed? If it's just if the old adage of they're going to make it too hard to do, by make it onerous or too expensive or whatever. We need to find that out, but it sounds like we're just sort of in between. I'm trying to understand, what we've asked of the state and what they've told us, if anything.
Okay, and I guess in essence, sir, I would say that we as a county are almost a third party in this. It's the owner of the dam and DCR are the two primary work. They work together to obtain this operations and maintenance permit.
Okay.
And then we're kind of a third party, would say, we'll come in and try and get this alteration permit to fix the dam. The operation and maintenance permit, to my understanding, is more of an engineer would assess the entire condition of the dam. And then based upon the hazard level of the dam, there's different criteria that are required in the permit as far as annual inspections, any type of maintenance that would need to be done on the dam during that year.
And the operations and maintenance permit would be negotiated between the dam owner and the DCR?
Yes.
We're not a party in that?
No, we're not a party in that.
And in the absence of that, you can't really do any repairs?
We can't do any repairs without DCR approving and giving us a permit. We'd also need to require permission from the owners of the dam to actually enter private property to do the work.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, it's just probably good to set the groundwork right here. We can't do anything without, we can't have Mr. Kane in a vacuum. We can't do it in a vacuum. It's Mr. Kane's dam. We basically have the asphalt. Since discontinuance happened, it came out of the VDOT system, and so now that road is our responsibility. Right. And it's our responsibility really along with and in partnership with Mr. Kane, because our road sits on his dam. So we can't even go in there and jam concrete in a hole without Mr. Kane's approval. He's been really great about letting us go out there and poke around under various permits. So it's we have to bring Mr. Kane into the discussion if it requires anything having to do with the dam.
Sure. So I had a couple of questions. One, when we petitioned to get it removed from VDOT and to take it over, what responsibility were we taking for future years? Was there a full inspection done at that time to know what we might be faced with at that in the future? And what discussions were had with the owner at that time? And so what was the expectation? And then do we have any estimate for what a repair to bring it up to safety, to a safety spot would be?
So it's a lot to unpack. I'll see if I can do the best I can with memory from then, and Mr. Kane, correct me if I'm wrong, when it was overtopped and we had some problems with the dam. At that point, because it was in the state system, the state went in, took a look at it, determined that a significant amount of work would have to be done to bring the dam up to a point where VDOT was willing to consider keeping that road in the system. So really, I think we were faced with, and I think it was Mr. Kane's dad at the time was faced with, do you massively upgrade this dam to have the road? There was only one choice: massively upgrade the dam or close the road. And soon thereafter, there was a lot of work that went on behind the scenes, and soon thereafter, probably a year or two, Delegate Pogge had some legislation that was passed that effectively allowed us to ask the state to discontinue the road, pull it out of the system, and then that immediate upgrade to the dam wouldn't be necessary.
So we didn't do any repairs to something that we knew wasn't.
I think there might have been some minor things
in good shape.
But I will tell you, the letter from the CTB said, this is not what we advise you to do, but if you want to do it, do it. And so we kept the road open for the benefit of the traveling public without doing a full-on rebuild of the dam, which again, I'm saying that like we can do that. Ultimately, that's Mr. Kane's priority. We can't, prerogative. We can't say, I'm going to go in and rebuild your dam. It's his dam. So the road is now open to public travel, but it is our responsibility. You have the option and the ability at any time you want to close that road. It still allows for some public right of travel across it. You can say, I'm going to limit that. There's no cars, or whatever, but it sort of binds Mr. Kane because now you have a public right of access, and we've said we're not going to do anything with it. So the proper procedure at that point, which is why we put it as number 2, is abandonment. And abandonment takes away the public right of access across that road, returns the private property back to the private property owner, and then Mr. Kane can control it as he desires.
And our property is only, our obligation is only the asphalt.
You were responsible for the asphalt. Right. And I think we have some estimate as to what it would take, our guesstimate as to what it would take to rebuild the dam, don't we?
That'd be huge.
Yeah. That's really hard to, we're taking a stab in the dark, but I would estimate at least $2 million.
Yeah.
Would be.
That was, when we went through this years ago on the board, and the goal was to try to reopen the road for the people out there so that they didn't have to drive all that long
and that's tough
around. And it's really tough for them. So this was the only option we had. But I can tell you, before we actually got to where this option of getting the road back open was discussed, it was pretty clear that the new dam safety regulations would literally require him to tear the whole dam down and rebuild it from scratch. What's holding that dam together is a lot of those big old trees out there, and they don't allow them to put trees on any of these things now. So if you get into that DCR process, you're looking at a complete tear down and rebuild, and you're talking. I think $2 million would be optimistic. And it's not us that can do it because it's we don't own the dam. So we're sort of caught between a rock and a hard place on this because we were trying our best to serve the needs of the traveling public out there. And I will tell you that when the road was closed, it created its own set of problems because the cul-de-sac at the end where it was closed became a parking spot and a dumping spot. And it became a real problem for the community. So there's, no matter what you do, you're going to have some issues to deal with. But I think that in the absence of anything concrete from the state about what we could do to rebuild or keep this thing open, our hands are sort of tied.
And you got to think too, with where that dam's located, with fire and rescue, you've got a long track around.
Yeah,
Well, they're not using it now, are they?
And a couple of things. I was going to say it's a low-risk dam, so failure of the dam doesn't mean people downstream are in trouble. So I don't want folks to hear our conversation and think, oh my gosh, they've got a real problem downstream. It's been designated as not being a high risk if there's failure in terms of water flow. We're concerned with what's going on under there and the vehicle having a problem going across it today. And so that is a concern. But we've had that concern for a while, and emergency vehicles, Grace and I have talked with the chiefs, they're not traversing that way. The school system is not supposed to be going across that dam. So closing it didn't have any impact on it because we were concerned with going across it for a while. I don't think that's a recent decision. I think that decision was some years ago. But it is about a 15-minute trip for the longest person to go around. So it does add quite a bit of time if you've been used to crossing it and it's close to your home.
I guess, Mr. Kane, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Sure.
What have you, I'm sure you've given some thought as to if the county says, okay, we're walking away, we don't think this is safe, then do you know what, at that point, what would you do?
Well, so I would say at the time I worked to 2012 to get the road open because I kind of wanted to be a good neighbor, and I felt bad for all my neighbors down there. I live in Richmond, so when I come the other way. It doesn't affect me in the least, right? So, but I didn't want the dumpers, and I would catch people fooling around down there in the middle of the day and all kinds of stuff if I happened to be down there. So I figured, hey, it's going to solve the problem with the trash, and it's going to help with the neighbors. Since that time, though, the volume of cars across that dam are significant. It's much more so than I had remembered. So I would say it's probably 20 or 30 cars an hour. And half those cars, I would estimate, are trucks with trailers full of debris going to the waste transfer station. And so they're just kind of constantly bouncing. So I've noticed a lot of wear and tear just from all the traffic because a lot of it they're not people that live there. They're people going to the dump to drop stuff off. And that's been problematic. So, I've put some money into a grout curtain when you guys did the riprap and things like that. So I'm trying to improve it. But as you said, it's a $2 million fix. Yeah. So I've talked with Timmons Engineering in Richmond, and they said that if I can get a conditional certificate, that the dam safety will typically work with owners of old dams as long as I'm making kind of like good faith efforts to improve the dam. My father did not want to bring the trees down. I'm actually now amenable to that if I can figure out how to fund it. But in the meantime, there are other things that I can do to dramatically lessen the risk. For instance, like you put a side channel in that would be at the 50-year flood mark. So it would take all of the pressure off the dam. But Timmons said you can't do that if the road's there. So they told me that I'd have many more options and many more cost-effective options if the road were closed. Okay. So, it pains me that I worked hard in the beginning to help get it open, but now I would say I'm probably leaning toward closure just because it would be something I can accomplish over time.
No, I appreciate your efforts in those years past because that was a serious concern for everybody, and it just seems like we're sort of trapped on this one. So
I like that word.
Yeah, thank you for your willingness to work with us and everything on this to try to do what's right for the public. So,
and by the way, I would mention too, like I had some trees thinned, and when the guys were doing the work, they actually started a little fire and they called the fire department, and the wrong company was dispatched. They came to the bridge and couldn't come across it, turn around, and then we had to call the other dispatcher. So at least for me, because I'm the last one on the road, there was that who comes, right? And luckily, nothing happened, but those minutes could have made a difference. So at the very least, knowing which way to route people is good.
So we got the two options.
Yeah. It's very, because it is going to have an impact
It's going to have a tremendous impact
on the people that live there and that visit there. And I just wish, I guess, back in, I don't know what the answer was, maybe not opening it back up again, I bet. But then we've had people that have used it all this time, so So if we were to close it, when is this going to?
Well, from a legal procedure, you can close it whenever you want to. The abandonment procedure is a minimum of a 30-day procedure. And so if you told me to start that, I'd begin that, but it really wouldn't occur probably until July. But it's a 30-day procedure with a lot of notification. There's posting along the road, there's posting at the courthouse, there's newspaper advertisements. It's relatively involved.
And to the board, the closure of it, I do think the county's at risk. I mean, we know it's in bad shape. It's been that way for the last 8 months. If we leave it open through the abandoned process, it's just liability during that time. So I think from a staff side, we would want to close it, which when we'll put up barricades, they'll take them down. We'll put up barricades, they'll take them down. So at least have some warnings that would tell people they shouldn't drive across it. And then if you had somebody hurt during the process, we would at least have the argument that we did, in fact, put up barricades. They're not going to be things you can't move out of the way short term. Yep. But if you go through the abandonment process, which is, I think, where we are from a recommendation of cost and safety, you're going to close it for years, even if you rebuild it. And so you could still...
I've got one question for you. I'm leaning toward this abandonment, and if we're going to abandon it, if we decide we want to abandon it, we probably ought to close it right away.
I think it's at risk every day people are going across it. I drove across it again yesterday. It's an uncomfortable feeling. Like maybe if you do it all the time, you get used to it, but I will tell you,
you do.
Knowing what's going on,
go fast.
I do think we're at risk from a term of having some liability of somebody hurting a vehicle, if nothing else.
Once it's closed and we abandon it, and Mr. Kane now has the ability to work with the DCR on maybe fixes to it. One of the biggest problems I see is going to be the fact that you put barricades, people move them. If you're going to do this, you probably need to do something that physically cuts the road and doesn't allow people access to it.
I think we have to do something, because right now we have a VDOT road that dead ends, so we have to put in some kind of measures and work with Mr. Kane to be able to create a turnaround where people come down and turn around. We would have some more permanent closure that won't just be barricades, so that you do have a more physical barrier. It's just a short term. It'll be barrels that people can move out of the way, and then you've at least indicated to people they shouldn't be there or shouldn't be crossing it. But long term, there will be some cost to close it, to make those turnarounds, and to put in some semi-permanent barricades of some sort.
And I think it's going to be incumbent on us to take a real proactive approach in keeping it policed, keeping down the dumping and things like that.
I was wondering if we talk with VDOT about doing the turnarounds, like at the last driveways.
Yeah.
Like you said, I mean, it's kind of like a quarter-mile stretch, and it's a blind curve, and it just encourages all kinds of negative behavior.
I would think that
would require some VDOT assistance, but I think that because that was one of the problems before. People would go past that last house, they get down there and have to back up, turn around someplace.
My guess would be, as long as you don't have property owners along the existing roadway, you're not somebody that's got a public access road today wouldn't want to lose that necessarily. So if the last house is the adjacent property owner to Mr. Kane, then I think that is a very high likelihood you could do that. If there are 4 or 5 parcels in between.
Yeah, I think it's me on either side all the way up.
Okay, that would make that better.
And you've got that driveway right there.
Exactly.
We used it for the triathlon, right? So that we would take it out of use altogether then, including
private property. Yes, because it'd be private property.
Including use like that.
I think a use like that comes back to, is Mr. Kane, as the owner of it, willing to let people come across his property? But from our standpoint, we wouldn't have the right to allow use of it like that.
Okay.
Okay. So you're looking for direction on...
Yes, sir. If you want me to start the abandonment procedure, the legal procedure, I'll do that.
I'm going to get some calls on this.
Or you are whatever. Okay.
My buddy's a big call.
And I sympathize with it because it's, that was my district. And it was a lot of really concerned people.
There are. Yeah, and I know.
And Mr. I sympathize for the calls that come to you as well as the residents there, because it is an inconvenience.
It is a big inconvenience.
But from our standpoint, and really where I think the board is trying to make sure we don't have them hurt. because I think that is certainly a possibility for their vehicle and maybe for themselves as well.
Okay, so is everybody comfortable with proceeding with the abandonment procedure?
Yeah, I wish there was a better way,
Okay, well,
but
everybody? Okay. Ruth?
That's,
Okay. We have direction for you?
It's a hard one.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
It'll come back to you.
All right. Okay, we are down to board request directives.
thank you, Mr. Kane, for
Yeah,
coming.
oh, yeah, Mr.
Thank
Kane,
you.
thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Need something, let me know.
Appreciate it.
We need $2 million to fix the dam.
You need something else.
That's right. Yeah. Can we set up a GoFundMe page?
Yeah.
That's right.
That's nice.
What a shame.
that is, it's gonna be tough on
Okay,
people.
we'll hold off for a minute. Till, County Administrator comes back.
Well, if you want to give them a whole bunch of directives right now, I'll take it.
Yeah,
All right.
I don't have anything. I don't have
I don't
anything.
have anything.
Nobody's got anything?
No, I was just going to say, no directives, but just to tell you that we had our Tourism Council meeting today. And the first one with our new executive director. So I should be bringing you maybe some changes that she's starting to initiate, because she's just, starting to get her hands on that operation. And then, of course, the LPGA is in town, and it's supposed to be great weather, so get on out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have only one thing that I've had several people contact me about. Why don't you use the Tommy tax for the recycling? Why don't you use it for recycling? And when I make the argument that we have made a decision to use it for one-time things and we're putting it into capital as opposed to recurring costs, it seems to be resonate with folks. Okay, that sounds like a reasonable thing to do. So I may try to work with the county administrator on putting out some sort of a letter, or some sort of communication to the public to try to give them a better understanding of what we're doing with that money and why it wasn't considered for input into the ongoing budget.
Well, the only other thing I guess I would add is they had broken it down for us at the beginning of our budget book, but then you had them break it down even more. It's very apparent where that money is going. So if we did not take that money and put it towards those items, and we put it towards the recycling, then which of those items should we do away with? Because those are all very important. I mean, it's towards schools, first responders. I mean, and I guess I would prefer that we call it SB 942 because that's what it is now, money. But because I think that's something that we have to seriously, I mean, it did get you, every bit of it is getting used. So as the state passes more through, I think they're going to be looking at localities to raise their own funds, and I think this is the beginning versus the end of where these type of initiatives are going to come down, in my humble opinion. Which does bring me to a question that I had. Will we be getting another budget, or will we be getting some change pages? Because we got the proposed,
We'll make
but
sure
since
we
we
get you split
adopted,
up.
will we be getting? Okay. So, but I do think what a letter is a good idea that spells out exactly where our budget was this year.
Mr. Chair, we're putting a lot of information related to recycling. Would you want that as a question or a comment that we're just including with information and work towards that, or is that a good distribution for it, or is that broader than you want it to be?
Well, I think it's important when you're doing the recycling information to let people know that we opted for the fee because we didn't want to put a recurring cost into this money. We want to use it for one-time things. That's important. But then, it may well be worthy of a letter to the editor. I would be happy to sign that, but I would want to make sure that everybody, staff helped draft it and everybody was comfortable with it, because I want it to be a board position that. Because one of the things I've told people is, if you take a look at our capital budget for the after the first year is years 2 through 5, all of that money goes into that, and that's what keeps us from having to borrow a huge amount of money to do all of the things we need, which includes expansion of the schools, a new school, and the fire department, fire building.
Maybe a letter to the editor, maybe an opinion piece or versus a letter to the editor.
Yeah, an SAP.
More words.
Yeah, or SAP.
SAPs, yeah. Thank you. I couldn't think of them.
Well, if you guys are comfortable with that, I'll have staff sort of help draft it up, and then we'll circulate it, make sure everybody's comfortable. We'll make sure we put it out.
Yeah.
Had one other thing, and I want to make sure that Doug is already gone. We have evaluations. The annual evaluations that we do right now have been, I think it was May. No, it's supposed to be May for you and June or July for Doug.
Something like ours was done in October.
Yeah, in October, and yours is due in October. And there was a comment made that maybe we ought to be doing them all simultaneously. Do them in June so that if we have any effects on pay rates, that we're not having to do it retroactively. So my proposal is, and I've asked for them for the evaluation sheets. I've gotten them from the ones we used last time for both the county attorney and JCSA. And what I want to do is to basically build a single sheet of using that as the basis and for an evaluation. And I'll try to get that done and get it out to you so you guys can look at it and say, okay, yeah, we like this, or we want to change this. So it's because it's our evaluation sheet that we're going to be using. I want to try to have it standardized and make it a little more detailed opportunity to put in all sorts of stuff. But I will try to get that to you because I'd like to come back and do those at the June meeting. We could do
the work session.
No, well, we could do it close. We can do closed session after as the regular meeting as for our evaluation. And my intention would be all of us fill out the forms. I collect them, summarize them all, average them all, put all the comments, everything, and then send it back to you as one document from the board. This will include everybody's individual input, questions and stuff, but one document from the board that will be given to the county administrator or to the county attorney. You have a copy, and when we come in, we sit down and go through that, and that's the evaluation process. I think it gives us a much better opportunity to, if we line some of these things out a little more detailed than we have in the past. Like the one Michael shared one that they used for the HRPDC, and I think it was very good. But
okay, I'm sorry.
Am I losing you?
You lost me. So you want to try to do Mr. Stevens, Mr. Kinsman, and Mr. Powell at our June 11 meeting?
If we can.
And so we got to get all of their material, get all of it read, and get 3 evaluations done for all on one night. It just seems like it seems like a lot to me. It seems like if we were to try to do even 2 June 11 and then 1 at our work session.
Well, Doug's should be at the JCSA.
Yeah, you should be there. That's closed session for the BOD.
Okay, so that would be the second.
We would be doing these two. Okay.
Great.
So is that okay?
Yeah.
All right.
I just, on top of all of our other work that we've got going on, to try to do all 3 of those by June 11.
I want to make sure that everybody's comfortable.
And get back to you, because I'm assuming you.
I'm going to get you that form here in the next 24 to 48 hours.
And then are we going to give it back to you when we've completed
first of all, I want to make sure you're okay with the form.
Okay.
And that everything on it, if you have any changes you recommend, so that we get everybody happy with the form. Once we're happy, I'm going to fire it all out to you and ask you to, take 4, 5, 6 days to go through and do it and send it back to me.
Yeah.
And because it won't take very long to summarize and put it out.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
All right.
All right. Are you guys? Is that? I mean, because of I think your contracts basically say when you're supposed to be doing it. Are you all comfortable doing that, or do we need to do anything to make it work? This way we can. If we're doing it consistently, and I'd like to have it on the schedule to do that every year. That way we're all, we don't forget about we should have done it last month. So it occurs in June each year.
All right.
Okay. All right. Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay, no board request, no closed session? Okay, I will look for a motion for adjournment till 5 p.m. on June 11th, 2019.
Motion.
We have a motion.
Mr. Hibbel?
Aye.
Ms. Larson?
Aye.
Ms. Sadler?
Aye.
Mr. McBennett?
Aye.
Mr. Eisenhower?
Okay, we are adjourned.